Niger.
Niger, officially the Republic of Niger, is a landlocked country in Western Africa, named after the Niger River. It borders Nigeria and Benin to the south, Burkina Faso and Mali to the west, Algeria and Libya to the north and Chad to the east. Niger covers a land area of almost 1,270,000 km², making it the largest nation in West Africa, with over 80% of its land area covered by the Sahara Desert. The country's predominantly Islamic population of 17,138,707 is mostly clustered in the far south and west of the nation. The capital city is Niamey, located in the far southwest corner of Niger. Niger is a developing country, and is consistently one of the lowest ranked in the United Nations Human Development Index, HDI. It was ranked 186th of 186 countries for 2012. Much of the non-desert portions of the country are threatened by periodic drought and desertification. The economy is concentrated around subsistence and some export agriculture clustered in the more fertile south, and the export of raw materials, especially uranium ore. Niger faces serious challenges to development due to its landlocked position, desert terrain, poor education and poverty of its people, lack of infrastructure, poor healthcare, and environmental degradation. Nigerian/Society reflects a diversity drawn from the long independent histories of his several ethnic groups and regions and their relatively short period living in a single state. Historically, what is now Niger has been on the fringes of several large states. Since independence, Nigerians have lived under 5 constitutions and 3 periods of military rule. Following a military coup in 2010, Niger has become a democratic, multi-party state. A majority live in rural areas, and have little access to advanced education.
History.
While most of what is now Niger has been subsumed into the inhospitable Sahara Desert in the last 2,000 years, 5,000 years ago the north of the country was fertile grasslands. Populations of pastoralists have left paintings of abundant wildlife, domesticated animals, chariots, and a complex culture that dates back to at least 10,000 BCE. Several former northern villages and archaeological sites date from the Green Sahara period of 7,500–7,000 to 3,500–3,000 BCE. The Songhai Empire expanded into what is modern Niger from the 15th century, reaching as far as Agades before its collapse in 1591, from which the modern Zorma and Songhai peoples trace their history. At its fall, portions of the empire and refugees from modern Mali formed a series of Songhai states, with the Dendi kingdom becoming the most powerful. From the 13th century, the nomadic Tuareg formed large confederations, pushed southward, into the Air Mountains, displacing some previous residents to the south. At their peak, the Tuareg confederations ruled most of what is now northern Niger, and extended their influence into modern Nigeria. In the 18th century, fewer pastoralists moved into the Light Arco area of the west, while smaller Zorma kingdoms, siding with various Hausa states, clashed with the expanding Fulani Empire of Sokoto from the south. The colonial border with British Nigeria was in part based on the rupture between the Sokoto Caliphate to the south, and Hausa ruling dynasties which had fled to the north. In the Far East around the Lake Chad Basin, the successive expansion of the Kanem Empire and Bonu Empire spread ethnically Kanuri and Tubu rulers and their subject states as far west as Zinda and the Kawura Oases from the 10th to the 17th centuries. In the 19th century, contact with the West began when the first European explorers, notably Mungo Park, British, and Heinrich Barth, German, explored the area, searching for the source of the Niger River. Although French efforts at pacification began before 1900, dissident ethnic groups, especially the Desert Tuareg, were not fully subdued until 1922, when Niger became a French colony. Niger's colonial history and development parallel that of other French West African territories. France administered its West African colonies through a governor-general in Dakar, Senegal, and governors in the individual territories, including Niger. In addition to conferring French citizenship on the inhabitants of the territories, the 1946 French Constitution provided for decentralization of power and limited participation in political life for local advisory assemblies.
Independence.
A further revision in the organization of overseas territories occurred with the passage of the Overseas Reform Act, Loi Cadre, of July 23, 1956, followed by reorganizing measures enacted by the French Parliament early in 1957. In addition to removing voting inequalities, these laws provided for creation of governmental organs, assuring individual territories a large measure of self-government. After the establishment of the Fifth French Republic on December 4, 1958, Niger became an autonomous state within the French community. Following full independence on August 3, 1960, however, membership was allowed to lapse. For its first 14 years as an independent state, Niger was run by a single-party civilian regime under the presidency of Hamani Diori. In 1974, a combination of devastating drought and accusations of rampant corruption resulted in a coup d'état that overthrew the Diori regime. Colonel Sinai Kouch and a small military group ruled the country until Kouch's death in 1987. He was succeeded by his chief of staff, Colonel Ali Saber, who released political prisoners, liberalized some of Niger's laws and policies, and promulgated a new constitution, with the creation of a single-party constitutional Second Republic. However, President Saber's efforts to control political reforms failed in the face of union and student demands to institute a multi-party democratic system. The Saber regime acquiesced to these demands by the end of 1990. New political parties and civic associations sprang up, and a national peace conference was convened in July 1991 to prepare the way for the adoption of a new constitution and the holding of free and fair elections. The debate was often contentious and accusatory, but under the leadership of Professor André Salafo, the conference developed a plan for a transition government. This caretaker government was installed in November 1991 to manage the affairs of state until the institutions of the Third Republic were put into place in April 1993. While the economy deteriorated over the course of the transition, certain accomplishments stand out, including the successful conduct of a constitutional referendum, the adoption of key legislation such as the electoral and rural codes, and the holding of several free, fair, and non-violent nationwide elections. Freedom of the press flourished with the appearance of several new independent newspapers. The results of the January 1995 parliamentary election meant cohabitation between a rival president and prime minister. This led to governmental paralysis, which provided Colonel Ibrahim Ber Manasra a rationale to overthrow the Third Republic in January 1996. While leading a military authority that ran the government, concealed a Salute National, during a 6-month transition period, Ber enlisted specialists to draft a new constitution for a Fourth Republic announced in May 1996. Ber organized a presidential election in July 1996. While voting was still going on, he replaced the Electoral Commission. The new commission declared him the winner after the polls closed. His party won 57% of parliament seats in a flawed legislative election in November 1996. When his efforts to justify his coup and subsequent questionable elections failed to convince donors to restore multilateral and bilateral economic assistance, a desperate Ber ignored an international embargo against Libya and sought Libyan funds to aid Niger's economy. In repeated violations of basic civil liberties by the regime, opposition leaders were imprisoned. Journalists often arrested, and deported by an unofficial militia composed of police and military. And independent media offices were looted and burned. As part of an initiative started under the 1991 National Conference, however, the government signed peace accords in April 1995 with all, meaning Tuareg and Tubu groups that had been in rebellion since 1990. The Tuareg claimed they lacked attention and resources from the central government. The government agreed to absorb some former rebels into the military and, with French assistance, help others return to a productive civilian life. On April 9, 1999, Ber was killed in a coup led by Major Duda Malam Wank, who established a Transitional National Reconciliation Council to oversee the drafting of a constitution for a Fifth Republic with a French-style semi-presidential system. In votes that international observers found to be generally free and fair, the Nigerian electorate approved the new constitution in July 1999 and held legislative and presidential elections in October and November 1999. Heading a coalition of the National Movement for a Developing Society, MNSD, and the Democratic and Social Convention, CDS, Mamadou Tandja won the election. The new second-term government of the Fifth Republic took office on December 30, 2002. In August 2002, serious unrest within the military occurred in Niamey, Diffa, and Ngwimi, but the government was able to restore order within several days. The legislature elected in December 2004 contained 7 political parties. President Tandja was re-elected in December 2004 and reappointed Hama Amado as Prime Minister. Mayor Manus Main, the head of the CDS, was re-elected President of the National Assembly, Parliament, by his peers. In October 2006, the government of Niger announced that it would deport to Chad more than 150,000 Arabic-speaking nomads. In June 2007, Sinai Umaru was nominated as the new Prime Minister after Hama Amado was democratically forced out of office by the National Assembly through a motion of no confidence. From 2007 to 2008, the Second Tuareg Rebellion took place in northern Niger, worsening economic prospects and shutting down political progress. In a February 2010 coup d'état, a military junta was established in response to Tandja's attempted extension of his political term through constitutional manipulation. The coup established a junta led by the Supreme Council for the Restoration of Democracy, which then held elections in 2011 that were judged internationally to be free and fair.
Geography, climate, and ecology.
Niger is a landlocked nation in West Africa located along the border between the Sahara and Sub-Saharan regions. It lies between latitudes 11 deg and 24 degn, and longitude 0 deg and 16 dege. Niger's area is 1,267,000 square kilometers, 489,191 square miles, of which 300 square kilometers, 116 square miles, is water. This makes it slightly less than twice the size of France, and the world's 22nd largest country. Niger borders 7 countries and has a total perimeter of 5,697 kilometers, 3,540 miles. The longest border is with Nigeria to the south, 1,497 kilometers or 930 miles. This is followed by Chad to the east, at 1,175 kilometers, 730 miles, Algeria to the north-northwest, 956 kilometers or 594 miles, and Mali at 821 kilometers, 510 miles. Niger also has small borders in its far southwest with Burkina Faso at 628 kilometers, 390 miles, and Benin at 266 kilometers, 165 miles, and to the north-northeast Libya at 354 kilometers, 220 miles. The lowest point is the Niger River, with an elevation of 200 meters, 656 feet. The highest point is Mont Idou-Colonas in the Air Mountains at 2,022 m, 6,634 feet. The north of the country is covered by large deserts and semi-deserts. The typical mammal fauna consists of odax antelopes, scimitar horned oryx, gazelles and in mountains Barbary sheep. One of the largest reserves of the world, the Air and Tenere National Nature Reserve was founded in the northern parts of the Niger to protect these rare species. The southern parts of Niger are naturally dominated savannas. The W National Park, situated in the bordering area to Burkina Faso and Benin, belongs to one of the most important areas for wildlife in Western Africa, which is called the WALE Penjari complex. It has the most important population of the rare West African lion and one of the last populations of the Northwest African cheetah. Other wildlife includes elephants, buffaloes, roan antelopes, cob antelopes and warthogs. The West African giraffe is currently not found in the W National Park, but further north in Niger, where it has its last relic population.
Climate.
Niger's subtropical climate is mainly very hot and dry, with much desert area. In the extreme south there is a tropical climate on the edges of the Niger River basin. The terrain is predominantly desert plains and sand dunes, with flat to rolling savanna in the south and hills in the north.
Politics.
Niger's new constitution was approved in July 1999. It restored the semi-presidential system of government of the December 1992 Constitution, Third Republic, in which the President of the Republic, elected by universal suffrage for a 5-year term, and a Prime Minister named by the President share executive power. As a reflection of Niger's increasing population, the unicameral National Assembly was expanded in 2004 to 113 deputies elected for a 5-year term under a majority system of representation. Political parties must attain at least 5% of the vote in order to gain a seat in the legislature. The Constitution also provides for the popular election of municipal and local officials, and the first ever successful municipal elections took place on July 24, 2004. The National Assembly passed in June 2002 a series of decentralization bills. As a first step, administrative powers will be distributed among 265 communes, local councils. In later stages, regions and departments will be established as decentralized entities. A new electoral code was adopted to reflect the decentralization context. The country is currently divided into 8 regions, which are subdivided into 36 districts, departments. The chief administrator, governor, in each department is appointed by the government and functions primarily as the local agent of the central authorities. On May 26, 2009, President Tanja dissolved parliament after the country's constitutional court ruled against plans to hold a referendum on whether to allow him a 3rd term in office. According to the constitution, a new parliament was elected within 3 months. This touched off a political struggle between Tanja, trying to extend his term-limited authority beyond 2009 through the establishment of a 6th republic, and his opponents who demanded that he step down at the end of his 2nd term in December 2009. See 2009 Nigerian constitutional crisis. The military took over the country and President Tanja was put in prison, charged with corruption. The military kept their promise to return the country to democratic civilian rule. A constitutional referendum and national elections were held. A presidential election was held on January 31, 2011, but as no clear winner emerged, runoff elections were held on March 12, 2011. Mayor Madu Isulvo of the Nigerian Party for Democracy and Socialism was elected president. A parliamentary election was held at the same time.
Regions, departments, and communes.
Niger is divided into 7 regions and 1 capital district. These regions are subdivided into 36 departments. The 36 departments are currently broken down into communes of varying types. As of 2006 there were 265 communes, including communes urbains, urban communes, as subdivisions of major cities, communes rurales, rural communes, in sparsely populated areas and postes administratifs, administrative posts, for largely uninhabited desert areas or military zones. Rural communes may contain official villages and settlements, while urban communes are divided into quarters. Niger subdivisions were renamed in 2002, in the implementation of a decentralization project, first begun in 1998. Previously, Niger was divided into 7 departments, 36 arrondissements, and communes. These subdivisions were administered by officials appointed by the national government. These offices will be replaced in the future by democratically elected councils at each level. The pre-2002 departments, renamed as regions, and capital district. Agadez region, Diffa region, Dosso region, Maradi region, Tahoa region, Tillaberi region, Zinda region, Niamey, capital district.
Military and foreign relations. Foreign relations.
Niger pursues a moderate foreign policy and maintains friendly relations with the West and the Islamic world as well as non-aligned countries. It belongs to the UN and its main specialized agencies, and in 1980-81 served on the UN Security Council. Niger maintains a special relationship with former colonial power France and enjoys close relations with its West African neighbors. It is a charter member of the African Union and the West African Monetary Union, and also belongs to the Niger Basin Authority and Lake Chad Basin Commission, the Economic Community of West African States, the Non-Aligned Movement, the Organization of Islamic Cooperation and the Organization for the Harmonization of Business Law in Africa, OHADA. The westernmost regions of Niger are joined with contiguous regions of Mali and Burkina Faso under the Light-Arco-Gourmet Authority. The border dispute with Benin, inherited from colonial times and concerning Inter Alia Elite Island in the River Niger, was finally solved by the ICJ in 2005 to Niger's advantage.
Military.
The Niger Armed Forces total 12,000 personnel with approximately 3,700 gendarmes, 300 Air Force, and 6,000 Army personnel. The Air Force has 4 operational transport aircraft. The armed forces include General Staff and Battalion Task Force organizations consisting of 2 paratroop units, 4 light armored units, and 9 motorized infantry units located in Tahoua, Agades, Durko, Zinda, Mgwami, Anati, and Maidwa. Since January 2003, Niger has deployed a company of troops to Côte d'Ivoire as part of the ECOWAS Stabilization Force. In 1991, Niger sent 400 military personnel to join the American-led Allied forces against Iraq during the Gulf War. Niger's defense budget is modest, accounting for about 1.6% of government expenditures. France provides the largest share of military assistance to Niger. Morocco, Algeria, China, and Libya have also provided military assistance. Approximately 15 French military advisors are in Niger. Many Nigerian military personnel receive training in France, and the Nigerian armed forces are equipped mainly with military hardware either sold or donated by France. In the past, U.S. assistance focused on training pilots and aviation support personnel, professional military education for staff officers, and initial specialty training for junior officers. A small foreign military assistance program was initiated in 1983. A U.S. Defense Attaché office opened in June 1985 and assumed security assistance office responsibilities in 1987. The office closed in 1996 following a coup d'état. A U.S. Defense Attaché office reopened in July 2000. The United States provided transportation and logistical assistance to Nigerian troops deployed to Côte d'Ivoire in 2003. Additionally, the U.S. provided initial equipment training on vehicles and communications gear to a select contingent of Nigerian soldiers as part of the Department of State Pan-Sahel initiative. In February 2010, the Army of Niger staged another coup d'état that ousted President Tanja Mamado, who had been behaving in an increasingly dictatorial fashion. The army claims to be acting toward the restoration of democracy.
Economy.
The economy of Niger centers on subsistence crops, livestock, and some of the world's largest uranium deposits. Drought cycles, desertification, a 2.9% population growth rate, and the drop in world demand for uranium have undercut the economy. Niger shares a common currency, the CFA franc, and a common central bank, the Central Bank of West African States, BCEAO, with 7 other members of the West African Monetary Union. Niger is also a member of the Organization for the Harmonization of Business Law in Africa, OHADA. In December 2000, Niger qualified for enhanced debt relief under the International Monetary Fund Programme for Heavily Indebted Poor Countries, HIPC, and concluded an agreement with the Fund for Poverty Reduction and Growth Facility, PRGF. Debt relief provided under the enhanced HIPC initiative significantly reduces Niger's annual debt service obligations, freeing funds for expenditures on basic healthcare, primary education, HIV/AIDS prevention, rural infrastructure, and other programs geared at poverty reduction. In December 2005, it was announced that Niger had received 100% multilateral debt relief from the IMF, which translates into the forgiveness of approximately $86 million USD in debts to the IMF, excluding the remaining assistance under HIPC. Nearly half of the government's budget is derived from foreign donor resources. Future growth may be sustained by exploitation of oil, gold, coal, and other mineral resources. Uranium prices have recovered somewhat in the last few years. A drought and locust infestation in 2005 led to food shortages for as many as 2.5 million Nigerians.
Agriculture.
The agricultural economy is based largely upon internal markets, subsistence the agriculture, and the export of raw commodities, foodstuffs and cattle to neighbors. Niger's agricultural and livestock sectors are the mainstay of all but 18% of the population. 14% of Niger's GDP is generated by livestock production, camels, goats, sheep and cattle, said to support 29% of the population. Thus 53% of the population is actively involved in crop production. 15% of Niger's land that is arable is found mainly along its southern border with Nigeria. In these areas, pearl millet, sorghum, and cassava are the principal rain-fed subsistence crops. Irrigated rice for internal consumption is grown in parts of the Niger River Valley in the west. While expensive, it has, since the devaluation of the CFA franc, sold for below the price of imported rice, encouraging additional production. Cowpeas and onions are grown for commercial export, as are small quantities of garlic, peppers, potatoes, and wheat. Oasis farming in small patches of the north of the country produces onions, dates, and some market vegetables for export. But for the most part, rural residents engaged in crop tending are clustered in the south center and southwest of the nation. In those areas, the Sahel, which can expect to receive between 300 to 600 mm, 12 to 24 in, of rainfall annually. A small area in the southern tip of the nation, surrounding Gaia, can expect to receive 700 to 900 mm, 28 to 35 in, or rainfall. Northern areas which support crops, such as the southern portions of the Air Massif and the Kawur Oasis, rely upon oases and a slight increase in rainfall due to mountain effects. Large portions of the northwest and far east of the nation, while within the Sahara Desert, see just enough seasonal rainfall to support semi-nomadic animal husbandry. The populations of these areas, mostly Tuareg, Adab, Fula, and Tubu, travel south, a process called transhumance, to pasture and sell animals in the dry season, north into the Sahara in the brief rainy season. Rainfall varies, and when it is insufficient, Niger has difficulty feeding its population and must rely on grain purchases and food aid to meet food requirements. Rains, as in much of the Sahel, have been marked by annual variability. This has been especially true in the 20th century, with the most severe drought on record beginning in the late 1960s and lasting, with one break, well into the 1980s. The long-term effect of this, especially to pastoralist populations, remains in the 21st century, with those communities which rely upon cattle, sheep, and camels husbandry losing entire herds more than once during this period. Recent rains remain variable. For instance, the rains in 2000 were not good, those in 2001 were plentiful and well distributed. Soils that have become degraded, for example by intensive cereal production, cover some 50% of Niger's land. Laterite soils have a high clay content, which means they have higher cation exchange capacity and water holding capacity than sandy soils. However, if laterite soils become degraded, a hard crust can form on the surface, which hinders water infiltration and the emergence of seedlings. It is possible to rehabilitate such soils, using a system called the bioreclamation of degraded lands. This involves using indigenous water harvesting methods, such as planting pits and trenches, applying animal and plant residues, and planting high-value fruit trees and indigenous vegetable crops that are tolerant of drought conditions. The International Crops Research Institute for the Semi-Arid Tropics, ICRISAT, has employed this system to rehabilitate degraded laterite soils in Niger and increase smallholder farmers' incomes. Trials have demonstrated that a 200 m2 plot can yield an income of around $100, which is what men traditionally earn from millet production per hectare, 10,000 m2. As women are often given degraded soils, using this practice has helped to improve livelihoods for women in Niger. The Kandaji Dam on the Niger River, whose construction started in August 2008, is expected to improve agricultural production in the Tillaberi department by providing water for the irrigation of 6,000 hectares initially and of 45,000 hectares by 2034.
Exports.
Uranium is Niger's largest export. Foreign exchange earnings from livestock, although difficult to quantify, are second. Actual exports far exceed official statistics, which often fail to detect large herds of animals informally crossing into Nigeria. Some hides and skins are exported, and some are transformed into handicrafts. Substantial deposits of phosphates, coal, iron, limestone, and gypsum also have been found in Niger.
Uranium.
The persistent uranium price slump has brought lower revenues for Niger's uranium sector, although uranium still provides 72% of national export proceeds. The nation enjoyed substantial export earnings and rapid economic growth during the 1960s and 1970s after the opening of two large uranium mines near the northern town of Arlit. When the uranium-led boom ended in the early 1980s, however, the economy stagnated, and new investment since then has been limited. Niger's two uranium mines, Somo's open-pit mine and Comanak's underground mine, are owned by a French-led consortium and operated by French interests. However, as of 2007, many licenses have been given to other companies from countries such as India, Canada and Australia in order to exploit new deposits.
Gold.
Exploitable deposits of gold are known to exist in Niger in the region between the Niger River and the border with Burkina Faso. On October 5, 2004, President Tandja announced the official opening of the Samira Hill gold mine in Tira department and the first Nigerian gold ingot was presented to him. This marked a historical moment for Niger as the Samira Hill gold mine represents the first commercial gold production in the country. Samira Hill is owned by a company called SML, Société des Mines du Litarco, which is a joint venture between two Canadian companies, Société Samafo and Etruscan Resources. Both companies own 40% each of SML and the government of Niger owns 20%. The first year's production is predicted to be 135,000 troy ounces, 4,200 kilograms. 9,260 pounds avoirdupois, of gold at a cash value of $177 per ounce, $5.70 per gram. The mine reserves for the Samira Hill mine total 10,073,626 tons at an average grade of 2.21 grams per ton, from which 618,000 troy ounces, 19,200 kilograms, 42,400 pounds, will be recovered over a 6-year mine life. SML believes to have a number of significant gold deposits within what is now recognized as the gold belt known as the Samira Horizon, which is located between Gothai and Arolam.
Coal.
The Parastatral Sonercha, Société Nigérienne de Charbon, in Chirozérine, north of Agadez, extracts coal from an open pit and fuels an electricity generating plant that supplies energy to the uranium mines. There are additional coal deposits to the south and west that are of a higher quality and may be exploitable.
Oil.
Niger has oil potential. In 1992, the Jaddo permit was awarded to Hunt Oil Company, and in 2003 the 10-year permit was awarded to the China National Petroleum. An ExxonMobil Petronas joint venture was sold sole rights to the Agabon block, in the Diffa region north of Lake Chad, but never went beyond exploration. In June 2008, the government transferred the Agabon block rights to CNPC. Niger announced that in exchange for the $5 billion investment, the Chinese company would build wells, 11 of which would open by 2012, a 20,000 barrel per day, 3,200 m3/d refinery near Zinda and a pipeline out of the nation. The government estimates the area has reserves of 324 million barrels, 51,500,000 m3, and is seeking further oil in the Tenir Desert and near Boma. Niger began producing its first barrels of oil in 2011.
Growth rates.
The economic competitiveness created by the January 1994 devaluation of the Communauté financière africaine, CFA, franc contributed to an annual average economic growth of 3.5% throughout the mid-1990s. But the economy stagnated due to the sharp reduction in foreign aid in 1999, which gradually resumed in 2000, and poor rains in 2000. Reflecting the importance of the agricultural sector, the return of good rains was the primary factor underlying economic growth of 5.1% in 2000, 3.1% in 2001, 6.0% in 2002, and 3.0% in 2003. In recent years, the government of Niger drafted revisions to the Investment Code, 1997 and 2000, Petroleum Code, 1992, and Mining Code, 1993, all with attractive terms for investors. The present government actively seeks foreign private investment and considers it key to restoring economic growth and development. With the assistance of the United Nations Development Programme, UNDP, it has undertaken a concerted effort to revitalize the private sector.
Economic restructuring and debt.
In January 2000, Niger's newly elected government inherited serious financial and economic problems including a virtually empty treasury, past due salaries, 11 months of arrears, and scholarship payments, increased debt, reduced revenue performance, and lower public investment. In December 2000, Niger qualified for enhanced debt relief under the International Monetary Fund Programme for highly indebted poor countries and concluded an agreement with the Fund on a Poverty Reduction and Growth Facility, PRGF. In addition to changes in the budgetary process and public finances, the new government has pursued economic restructuring towards the IMF-promoted privatization model. This has included the privatization of water distribution and telecommunications and the removal of price protections for petroleum products, allowing prices to be set by world market prices. Further privatizations of public enterprises are in the works. In its effort to comply with the IMF's Poverty Reduction and Growth Facility plan, the government also is taking actions to reduce corruption and, as the result of a participatory process encompassing civil society, has devised a poverty reduction strategy plan that focuses on improving health, primary education, rural infrastructure, and judicial restructuring. A long-planned privatization of the Nigerian power company, Nigelec, failed in 2001 and again in 2003 due to a lack of buyers. Sonetel, the nation's telephone operator which was separated from the post office and privatized in 2001, was renationalized in 2009. Critics have argued that the obligations to creditor institutions and governments have locked Niger into a process of trade liberalization that is harmful for small farmers and in particular, rural women.
Foreign aid.
The most important donors in Niger are France, the European Union, the World Bank, the International Monetary Fund, and various United Nations agencies, UNDP, UNICEF, FAO, World Food Programme, and United Nations Population Fund. Other principal donors include the United States, Belgium, Germany, Switzerland, Canada, and Saudi Arabia. While USAID does not have an office in Niger, the United States is a major donor, contributing nearly $10 million each year to Niger's development. The U.S. also is a major partner in policy coordination in such areas as food security and HIV/AIDS. The importance of external support for Niger's development is demonstrated by the fact that about 45% of the government's FY 2002 budget, including 80% of its capital budget, derives from donor resources. In 2005 the UN drew attention to the increased need for foreign aid given severe problems with drought and locusts resulting in the 2005-06 Niger food crisis, endangering the lives of around 1 million people.
2010 famine.
In June to August 2010, famine struck the Sahel. Niger's crops failed to mature in the heat and famine developed. 350,000 faced starvation and 1,200,000 were at risk of famine. In Chad, the temperature reached 47.6 DEGC, 118 DEGF, on June 22 in Famagogo, breaking a record set in 1961 at the same location. Niger tied its highest temperature record set in 1998, also on June 22, at 47.1 DEGC. 117 DEGF, in Bilma. That record was broken the next day, on June 23 when Bilma hit 48.2 DEGC, 119 DEGF. The hottest temperature recorded in Sudan was reached on June 25, at 49.6 DEGC, 121 DEGF, in Dongola, breaking a record set in 1987. Niger reported diarrhea, starvation, gastroenteritis, malnutrition and respiratory diseases killed and sickened many children July 14. The new military junta is appealing for international food aid and has taken serious steps to calling overseas help since coming to office in February 2010. On July 26, the heat reached near record levels over Chad and Niger.
Infrastructure. Transportation.
Transport is crucial to the economy and culture of this vast landlocked nation, with cities separated by huge uninhabited deserts, mountain ranges, and other natural features. Niger's transport system was little developed during the colonial period, 1899 to 1960, relying upon animal transport, human transport, and limited river transport in the far southwest and southeast. No railways were constructed in the colonial period, and most roads outside the capital remained unpaved. The Niger River is unsuitable for river transport of any large scale, as it lacks depth for most of the year, and is broken by rapids at many spots. Camel caravan transport was historically important in the Sahara Desert and Sahel regions which cover most of the north. Road transport, especially shared taxis, buses, and trucks, are the primary form of long-distance transport for most Nigerians. There were 10,100 kilometers, 6,300 miles, of roads in the nation in 1996, but only 798 kilometers, 496 miles, were paved. Most of this total was in large cities and in two main highways. The first major paved highway was constructed in the 1970s and 80s to transport uranium from the far northern mining town of Arlit to the Benin border. Much of Niger's export economy relies upon ports in Cotonou, Lome, and Port Harcourt. This road, dubbed the Uranium Highway, runs through Arlit, Agades, Tahoua, Ninkoni, and Niamey, and is part of the Trans-Sahara Highway system. The paved RN1, Route Nationale runs east-west across the south of the nation, from Niamey via Maradi and Zinda towards Diffa in the far east of the nation, although the stretch from Zinda to Diffa is only partially paved. Other roads range from all-weather laterite surfaces to graded dirt or sand pistes, especially in the desert north. These form a more extensive numbered highway system. Niger's main international airport is Diori Hamani International Airport at Niamey. Other airports in Niger include Mano Dayak International Airport at Agades and Zinda Airport near Zinda.
Education.
The literacy rate of Niger is among the lowest in the world. In 2005 it was estimated to be only 28.7%, 42.9% male and 15.1% female. Primary education in Niger is compulsory for 6 years. The primary school enrollment and attendance rates are low, particularly for girls. In 1997, the gross primary enrollment rate was 29.3%, and in 1996, the net primary enrollment rate was 24.5%. About 60% of children who finish primary schools are boys, as the majority of girls rarely attend school for more than a few years. Children are often forced to work rather than attend school, particularly during planting or harvest periods. In addition, nomadic children in the north of the country often do not have access to schools.
Health.
Niger's high infant mortality rate is comparable to levels recorded in neighboring countries. However, the child mortality rate, deaths among children between the ages of 1 and 4, is exceptionally high, 248 per 1,000 due to generally poor health conditions and inadequate nutrition for most of the country's children. According to the organization Save the Children, Niger has the world's highest infant mortality rate. Niger also has the highest fertility rate in the world, 7.03 births per woman according to 2013 estimates. This means that nearly half, 49% of the Nigerian population is under age 15. Niger has the 11th highest maternal mortality rate in the world at 820 deaths/100,000 live births. There were 3 physicians and 22 nurses per 100,000 persons in 2006.
Demographics.
Over half the population of Niger belong to the Hausa, who also constitute the major ethnic group in northern Nigeria, and the Zorma Songhai, who also are found in parts of Mali. Both groups, along with the Gormanj, are sedentary farmers who live in the arable, southern tier of the country. The remainder of Nigerians are nomadic or semi-nomadic livestock-raising peoples, Fulani, Tuareg, Kanuri, Arabs, and Tubu, who make up about 20% of Niger's population. With rapidly growing populations and the consequent competition for meager natural resources, lifestyles of agriculturalists and livestock herders have come increasingly into conflict in Niger in recent years. A 2005 study stated that over 800,000 people, nearly 8% of the population, in Niger are enslaved.
Religion.
Islam, spread from North Africa beginning in the 10th century, has greatly shaped the mores of the people of Niger. Between 80 and more than 98% of the population is Muslim, with small animist and Christian communities, the latter a consequence of missionaries established during the French colonial years, as well as urban expatriate communities from Europe and West Africa. Niger appears as number 50 on the World Watch List, which ranks countries by the severity of persecution that Christians face for actively pursuing their faith.
Islam.
Approximately 95% of Muslims in Niger are Sunni and Sufi. 5% are Shia. Islam was spread into what is now Niger beginning in the 15th century, by both the expansion of the Songhai Empire in the west, and the influence of the trans-Saharan trade traveling from the Maghreb and Egypt. Tuareg expansion from the north, culminating in their seizure of the Far Eastern oases from the Kanem-Bornu Empire in the 17th centuries, spread distinctively Berber practices. Both Zorma and Hausa areas were greatly influenced by the 18th and 19th century Fula-led Sufi brotherhoods, most notably the Sokoto Caliphate, in today's Nigeria. Modern Muslim practice in Niger is often tied to the Tijani Sufi brotherhoods, although there are small minority groups tied to Hamilism and Niassist Sufi orders in the west, and the Say Nasir in the far northeast. A small center of Wahhabite followers have appeared in the last 30 years in the capital and in Maradi. These small groups, linked to similar groups in Jos, Nigeria, came to public prominence in the 1990s during a series of religious riots. Despite this, Niger maintains a tradition as a secular state, protected by law. Interfaith relations are deemed very good, and the forms of Islam traditionally practiced in most of the country is marked by tolerance of other faiths and lack of restrictions on personal freedom. Divorce and polygyny are unremarkable, women are not secluded, and head coverings are not mandatory, they are often a rarity in urban areas. Alcohol, such as the locally produced beer Niger, is sold openly in most of the country.
Animism.
A small percentage of the population practices traditional indigenous religious beliefs. The numbers of animist practitioners are a point of contention. As recently as the late 19th century, much of the south center of the nation was unreached by Islam, and the conversion of some rural areas has been only partial. There are still areas where animist-based festivals and traditions, such as the Bori religion, are practiced by syncretic Muslim communities, in some Hausa areas as well as among some Tubu and Adar pastoralists, as opposed to several small communities who maintain their pre-Islamic religion. These include the Hausa-speaking Mori, or Azza, the Hausa word for pagan community in Dagondautsi in the south-southwest, and the Kanuri-speaking Manga near Zinda, both of whom practice variations of the pre-Islamic Hausa Magwasur religion. There are also some tiny Budma and Sunni animist communities in the southwest.
Culture.
Nigerian culture is marked by variation, evidence of the cultural crossroads which French colonialism formed into a unified state from the beginning of the 20th century. What is now Niger was created from 4 distinct cultural areas in the pre-colonial era: the Zoma-dominated Niger River Valley in the southwest, the northern periphery of Hausaland, made mostly of those states which had resisted the Sokoto Caliphate, and ranged along the long southern border with Nigeria, the Lake Chad Basin and Kaur in the far east, populated by Kanuri farmers and Tubu pastoralists who had once been part of the Kanem-Bornu Empire, and the Tuareg nomads of the Air Mountains and Saharan Desert in the vast north. Each of these communities, along with smaller ethnic groups like the pastoral Adabfula, brought their own cultural traditions to the new state of Niger. While successive post-independence governments have tried to forge a shared national culture, this has been slow forming, in part because the major Nigerian communities have their own cultural histories, and in part because Nigerian ethnic groups such as the Hausa, Tuareg and Kanuri are but part of larger ethnic communities which cross borders introduced under colonialism. Until the 1990s, government and politics was inordinately dominated by Niamey and the Zoma people of the surrounding region. At the same time, the plurality of the population, in the Hausa borderlands between Bni and Koni and Main Saroa, have often looked culturally more to Hausaland in Nigeria than Niamey. Between 1996 and 2003, primary school attendance was around 30%, including 36% of males and only 25% of females. Additional education occurs through madrasas.
Popular media.
Niger began developing diverse media in the late 1990s. Prior to the Third Republic, Nigerians only had access to tightly controlled state media. Now Niamey boasts scores of newspapers and magazines. Some, like Le Sahel, are government-operated, while many are critical of the government. Radio is the most important medium, as television sets are beyond the buying power of many of the rural poor, and illiteracy prevents print media from becoming a mass medium. In addition to the national and regional radio services of the state broadcaster ORTN, there are 4 privately owned radio networks which total more than 100 stations. 3 of them, the Anfani Group, Sarania and Tenure, are urban-based commercial format FM networks in the major towns. There is also a network of over 80 community radio stations spread across all 7 regions of the country, governed by the Comité de Pilotage de Radios de Proximité, CPRP, a civil society organization. The independent sector radio networks are collectively estimated by CPRP officials to cover some 7.6 million people, or about 73% of the population, 2005. Aside from Nigerian radio stations, the BBC's Hausa services listen to on FM repeaters across wide parts of the country, particularly in the south, close to the border with Nigeria. Radio France Internationale also rebroadcasts in French through some of the commercial stations, via satellite. Tenure FM also runs a national independent television station of the same name. Despite relative freedom at the national level, Nigerian journalists say they are often pressured by local authorities. The state ORTN network depends financially on the government, partly through a surcharge on electricity bills, and partly through direct subsidy. The sector is governed by the Conseil Supérieur de Communications, established as an independent body in the early 1990s, since 2007 headed by Douda Diallo. International human rights groups have criticized government since at least 1996 as using regulation and police to punish criticism of the state.